name is Marina Kaljurand, and I'm at the moment the chair of the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace. I'm former Estonian foreign minister, and cyber came into my life in 2007, when during the cyber attacks I was Estonian ambassador to Russia, and I had to deal in practical terms with international cooperation. I'm a strong believer in international cooperation, although it didn't work then.
Please, Katie.
My name is Katie Moussouris. I'm the founder and CEO of Luta Security. I'll try and include this half of the room as well. I work with governments and large organizations to create programs to deal with vulnerability reports, whether you are paying a bug bounty or not. We'll touch on that a bit later. But I've also helped my government and the European governments on thinking about how do you create a more flexible workforce in terms of cybersecurity, and what are some of the policy creations that some regulators have made that in fact started out as good ideas, but the devil is in the details. So I've had to help undo things that were a little overzealous, such as the Wassenaar arrangement. How many of you have heard of that? In the regulation of this space, in order to not over-regulate defenders as you are trying to protect and control the proliferation of cyber weapons.
Perfect. Maria.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Maria Vello. I'm the CEO for the Cyber Defense Alliance. We're a non-profit public-private partnership. We focus in the financial industry. We take information, we share it at industrialized levels. We take that information and turn it into actionable intelligence, something that we can use to stop something from happening in industry. We also do intelligence reports that are actionable that we give to law enforcement so that they can go out, seize assets, seize funds, and make arrests. We're extremely tactical, we have operationalized everything, and we're extremely strategic because we're helping to build maturity levels across the members, across the sector, as far as raising maturity levels, raising resilience, and accelerated preparedness against cybercrime and cyber threats.
Thank you, Maria. Andreas.
Yeah, Andreas Koenen. I'm the leader of the Department for Cyber and Information Security within the German Department of the Interior for Building and Community. And so we are working on the cyber security architecture in Germany, the forthcoming IT security law, the cooperation with industry, and last but not least, to immediately come up with the question of research in cybersecurity and to enforce more and new ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Raúl.
My name is Raúl Riesco. I work for the Spanish Cybersecurity Institute. It's a national governmental research. We work to protect different constituencies. They are very different from each other. So citizens, companies, critical infrastructure. I'm the former head of research and development, and I'm working in intelligence as well as industrial control systems. And I was co-chair in European Commission NIS platform, who delivered the research roadmap, and then became on EXO, which is the European Cybersecurity Organizations. I was part of the board, member of the board. So I think this is more or less describe my experience.
Thank you, Raúl. So before we stepping into the discussion, I would like to do a poll. And I would like to ask you one question. Do you feel that the cyberspace is already over-regulated? Yes? Hands up. Not a single hand is hand up. So Marina?
There's one.
Even one? Okay. So he will definitely have some questions for us later on. So, but I would like to start with Marina. First of all, I feel sometimes frustrated because if you see the national protectionism and also the organizational silos we're working in, I feel sometimes this is almost impossible to have a multi-stakeholder governance in place globally. So is it not a waste of time to speaking on this topic nowadays?
Before I go to the question, I'd like to say how proud I am on a panel with so many ladies. I think that we are the most gender-balanced panel, especially with Maria and Katie, whom I think I know for a long time now. But because diplomats, they never answer the questions. They say what they want to say. So I did that part. But coming to the question, I think what we need today is clarity. because we all are using the same words. We're talking about open, free, accessible, use of ICTs. We're talking about multi-stakeholder model and inclusiveness. But what do we mean by that? Is Chinese internet as free as it is in Estonia? Question mark. So I think that we need clarity, and here we need international law, and we need norms. I'm a lawyer by the education, and then at the moment I'm a politician, so I understand the difference between international law and political norms. But I also know that so far we haven't been able to agree on how international law applies to cyber. We'll go to the conferences and repeat international law applies to cyber. But how? We haven't answered. It means we don't have clarity there. And maybe through norms, through additional regulations, we can start answering what are the norms, how to behave, because we need clarity. What is allowed, what is not, what happens if somebody violates. Multi-stakeholder, I also think that we are close to understanding it's crucial and important. And I would say that for me, maybe the document that proves that was the Paris Call, which was introduced by President Macron, celebrating the 100th anniversary after of the victory of the end of the First World War, which was signed by close to 500 participants, among them states, industry, civil society, NGO. So I see that there is appetite. But again, the future and the coming future in the United Nations and in other organizations will show how we will be able to take multi-stakeholder model inclusiveness from nice slogans to practical cooperation.
Yeah. That would leads me to a question to Andreas. And actually, I had a very interesting report in my hands from Neue Stiftung, Verantwortung Neue Stiftung. And they had a study about 50 organizations or so, just in Germany, are handling the topic cyber, right? We talked about this previously. And my question is there not so much level of conflict of interest having this organization in place and having silos talking maybe not to each other, how to solve actually that operational issue?
Clearly, we need communication for that. And so what we did is establishing the German Cyber Response Center. Clearly, there are 50 organizations, but it depends on the fact that we have 16 federal states here in Germany. And that's part of our constitutional system, to do it that way that the federal states in some responsibility, also for cyberspace, and so that anyone has to fulfill its own obligations. Then, if you do it that way, and it was a really effective system during the last 70 years in Germany, it brought us freedom and prosperity. So we have to find a way to communicate and to make a fortune out of that. That's not easy. Clearly, there are many things lacking at the moment. For example, it's not so easy to bring in, for example, the federal states into the communication of police forces, but nevertheless, we have to do it, and we did it, organized that way for good reasons.
I had also chat about this with Raúl, and you also have an initiative running in Spain. And actually we concluded that the silo breakdown is one of the major issues we have to face. What have you done actually in Spain in order to get this out of the way?
Well, we realized that at the end, we all share common goals, no matter if, for sure, there are also different outcomes, but we should be focused on that. So we made an experiment that now become a way of working. I think that we reset the way of working because the prosperity that we lived until today was part of that. So a lot of people with different ideas but common goals met together and then decided the constitution or whatever. So we agreed to sit down, even competitors between them, so big companies, startups, companies, and so on. And we realized that after, we made some dynamics as the government to, start these kind of discussions, then we got an agreement on 30 initiatives that were common for everyone, and we were interested to put resources on them. So at the end, even in those who seems to be just interesting for small companies, startups, at the end we're interested also for the large company. I put an example. We launched a cybersecurity initiative for creating new startups. It was a 100% public initiative. Large companies didn't care about it. But then when those were meeting different investors from different countries, they say, okay, what have you done with this investment? Okay, I'm interested on it. So even large companies were interested on this. So for sure, there are different and hundreds of initiatives that, for example, making some kind of research studies. It's up to each of them to use it differently or not. But at the end, all of them were interested in this kind of research. So why not to put efforts together, try to get something that probably we ourselves shared. And then, today it's working. So for sure it would be better, but let's reset our mind, because all of them wants to do good things. And we sit down, not only companies, but also researchers, hacking conferences as well. So it's different, venture capitalists and so on. It was very difficult, but it was dialogue after one after another. And I think that we all agreed on this kind of strategic plan.
So for me, it's quite important, Marina. You mentioned the Paris call. And at the Paris call, you have the IGF as well, the Internet Governance Forum. You mentioned other forums we have in place. Who should be actually responsible to bring all these initiatives together? Yeah, who is the global? You named yourself as a global commission for cyber stability, but how should this dialogue really go into the nation in order to get their national views on it, etc.?
I do not have the answer today. But I know that there are discussions going on at, for example, Secretary General of the United Nations called HighLevel Panel to look exactly at that, how to bridge the different frameworks that are happening. As much as I know, there are about 100 international cybersecurity dialogues, which is good. We're raising awareness, but now it's time to start cooperating. And so I'm really looking at the work of the HighLevel Panel, which will come out with recommendations also how to bridge different topics, how to bridge different institutions, but I don't think that in the end there's going to be one responsible. There will be state responsibility, the government responsibility, which will be the centerpiece in cooperation with others.
And Maria, you have a close cooperation also with the Europol, and you're counterfighting fraud, obviously. How is that actually working? What is the governance actually for your institution with public institutions? How do you deal with them?
So it's working extremely well, but it's working well because you have like-minded people that have a common goal, and no one cares who gets the credit. So everybody realizes that, look, leave your ego at the door. The enemy's on the outside. Let's all work together for a common goal. And we work with law enforcement. They work with us. They're in the same, offices with us. They're in and out. We have the banks sitting there, so all the banks have a seconded employee that sits there. Our team sits there. So constantly we're building trust. And, we talked about trust, and I think you have to earn trust. And you can't ever break that trust. So it's working because you have people that are like-minded, that know that this is a systemic and it's a global problem, and it's an epidemic proportion. And it's not just financial. I think, we talked about research and development. We talked about, some of the mergers and acquisitions. And I think, we do need norms, and we do need, to earn trust. But how do you do that when you have countries that protect the people, the very people that are attacking us? But it does work. When it does, and it works, we've been able to prevent DDoS attacks because we're sharing intelligence, sharing information. 2 banks got ransom notes. One bank that threatened to DDoS. The other bank one of them started getting DDoSed. The other bank did not. We took all the information, the type of attack, the specifics around it, the technology around it, architectures, topologies, all those things. The other banks, went away and they changed their architecture, so they made changes in their topologies. And by doing that, one bank, an hour and 50 minutes before the same attacker attacked, they had just made some changes, and it was a non-event. So we can do this.
So what only concerns me is actually this sharing of information and fighting against fraud is fantastic, but when we talk about vulnerabilities and zero exploits, etc., I just sitting next to the Bounty Queen, and first of all, you have to explain us what the Bounty Queen means, and then I would like to share some thoughts with you. Vulnerabilities and exploits are still weaponized, right? They're still being used by nation states and in violent non-nation states. How we can create trust if there's not a frame or part of a norm, how to deal with that?
Okay, so first to answer your question, I think I've earned that title, Bounty Queen, because I convinced Microsoft, who had publicly pledged to never pay for vulnerabilities, to start their own bug bounty program in 2013. And that was over 3 years of preparation, because I was a strategist at Microsoft, but I was using the data that we had to predict how can we make this more efficient and more win-win for both sides. At the time, Microsoft was receiving over 200,000 non-spam email messages a year of people trying to report security bugs for free. Over 200,000. Today, with 6 years of bug bounty under their belt, they still receive about the same amount. So it wasn't about increasing the reports, it was about using the data that we had and using incentives to target those friendly eyes. So to your point about the different markets, there is an offense market. Some people call it the black market for vulnerabilities and exploits. There is a purpose and a use for this market that is lawful and legitimate. You don't necessarily call people who work in the intelligence community inherently evil if they make use of these weapons. It's a matter of finding ways to balance the equities across having to defend your critical infrastructure and having to have some weapons available to use to target criminals, terrorist organizations, etc. Unfortunately, these weapons can be abused, hence the oversight requirements. But when we think about how do we use these bounty incentives most productively, it really does come down to not how they are being used today. And this was why I was calling attention to the fact that just slap a bounty on it and you can solve all of these problems. That turns this into a very transactional event of identifying security holes, and you can easily corrupt that well-intentioned acquisition of vulnerabilities for defensive purposes, and you can create perverse incentives. One of the bug bounty platforms actually boasts that you can make 16 times as much living in India being a bug bounty hunter than you can living in India being a software developer. Where do we outsource a lot of software development, especially for IoT? Right, so Dilbert had a cartoon about this in 1995, where they said, we're going to start a bug bounty, and someone said, I'm going to write myself a minivan, right, in code. So the joke's been there forever, but now we are seeing the crest of that becoming a potential reality. So one of the things that was also mentioned was about the European Union funding bug bounties against open source software that are used in European government. Now, the right idea was there, we need to support open source security. However, it was almost like the prescription was written for bug bounty before the doctor came in to diagnose the patient. And actually, the maintainers of open source security need more support. So a lot of people thought, well, why don't we just make that transactional as well? Just pay for the fixes, double down. Well, it turns out I asked the Apache Server Core maintainers, of which there are a handful, less than 5, who are paid full-time to maintain Apache Server Core. I asked them, would it help you? Number one, did you know the EU was about to bounty you? And they said, no, thanks for telling us. That was number one. Number two, I said, would it help if we doubled the bounty if someone supplied a fix, a working fix? And they said, please, God, don't do that. Because we already spend an inordinate amount of time arguing about breaking changes when someone tries to introduce a fix and they are not familiar enough with the architecture. So what we really need to be creating in terms of defensive incentives that are sustainable, especially in open source, is not create the mirror image transactional, find a bug, submit a fix. But we actually need to think about our labor pipeline. Why do open source maintainers do what they do? Why are there so many volunteers? In creating incentives to point out bugs have we actually ended up gutting our pipeline for the future maintainers, the future of keeping those open source systems secure? So I can talk a lot more about that, but you did ask only 2 questions, so I think that's...
Thank you.
Yeah.
And certainly, Raúl, you taking care about industry control systems in your research. And previously we talked about supply chain, and obviously many of the ICS topics are part of a huge supply chain. How does it make sense talking about bounty programs in supply chain? Who's actually coordinating? Is there any governance to coordinate vulnerabilities across a value chain? How do you progress in that space?
I think that the space is different, is worse because of the words said by Siemens this morning. So they have to support between 15, 20 years each new product that they delivered because of the industry or industrial network. The investments in energy or in other pieces of the network, industrial network, at the end are defined for features delivery, but for example, imagine that you want something to handle crypto. It's a CPU which is not ready for that. And you have to support it during 15 years or 20 years for depreciation and then to invest again. So we are lost, completely lost. So I think that the issue is worse than in IT. In IT, it's not under control. I think bug bounties are one of the solutions. Another solution that I know Katie a lot, and she's trying to promote is to accept that you will have sooner or later vulnerability. So let's run a vulnerability coordination program. So that's the point. So at the end, let's accept the reality.
Well, we need to speed up, right? So I learned from Sir Julian this morning, we have to speed up. Andreas, you cannot wait 10 years, right, to get this OT-IT problem solved. So how do you deal with the situation today?
Clearly, we have to go further on, and for example, looking from the government side at that, we have to push forward the standardization process for not only crypto, but also for cyber and information security in the IoT domain. And actually, not only to put forward standards, but to build on top of that some kind of certification or labeling system. Especially the last one is now in progress in Germany. We are pushing forward a labeling system based especially on the new EU cybersecurity framework for certification. And we are trying within the next IT security law a labeling system that could start out first with IoT components, with the smallest components that are usually bought by some end user, by some citizen. For example, the modern electric light bulb that is bound into the network, and that could also function as a bot if I get a bad one. And so what we need is some clear labeling. What's happening behind the scene? Is this electric light bulb really a reliable one now in the new sense? Not that it has a long living period. It should have this too, but it should have some clearly identifiable security requirements fulfilled. So what we are doing is just putting a sign on a label on the box. There's a QR code on it, and you scan the QR code when you're willing to buy it, and look at some criteria that are put on a website, and just below those criteria there are red and green flags so that the BSI can sign, okay, those criteria are fulfilled to our knowledge, or they are heard at the moment. So that's one step. We need that for the IoT that's in the hand of the customer and the citizen. We need the same for the industrial IoT. We need their criteria system and a certification system that shows to anyone using that IoT that is certified, for example, under common criteria. And for that, we have to develop our systems on base of the EU certification framework to make it mandatory, and in the end to come out with solutions of all the cybersecurity agencies, at least within the European Union.
So when you consider that speed of vulnerabilities or the time of zero exploits, zero time. Does it make sense to have a certification scheme in place?
Well, I think that there are different things that you can measure about an organization's security maturity, right? And one of those measures is how do they handle vulnerabilities that are publicly reported? How are they actually applying, the security mitigations and patches? And if we look at it, it's not just about that control. Equifax was brought up earlier today. A lot of people blamed a delay in applying the available patch as to the reason, but actually, if you dig deeper, it was that some of their beaconing systems that were supposed to be communicating with each other, alerting them that all this data was marching out the front door, those systems were offline because of expired certificates. So that goes to show. So it's not like you could just apply a label to what they did or didn't do in a very, siloed way. There are multiple different capability areas that I think need to be measured, and this is going to be a changing thing for an organization. Microsoft started out at, in the late 90s as the laughingstock of security, and then, incredible pioneers drove security forward there, and then they became known as one of the best. So it's not a static measure at all in terms of capabilities. So I think a label might be difficult to keep up, but if you can choose the right controls to measure and some assertion, and the assertion isn't, I have a bug bounty program, therefore I'm good at security. That is absolutely not correct.
It's not a tick box.
Right, it is
exercise,
not, although a lot of people are using it that way. But if you can measure across important capability areas and do that in enough of an ongoing basis that you get a general sense of where people are maturity-wise, I think that might be helpful.
So what I found interesting, Marina, when we talk about the norms, actually you develop, right? First time we have a techie next to me on a political discussion. How does it work actually in your norms? How the vulnerability and all this tech stuff really being considered in your norms?
Well, first I want to say that I've been in several events next to Katie, and I've listened to her several times, and I admire very much what we're doing. And if you see, I'm wearing my cyber bugs, sitting next to the bounty bug queen. One is American bug, another is Estonian bug. They look the same. So that's the importance of international cooperation. And my final word on bug bounty program is that I think that for governments, it also has to do, it's a PR tool. It's a PR tool because I think one of the best things what Pentagon did was hack the Pentagon. I don't know whether they needed to do it publicly or not, but it worked. So I'm dreaming that at some point, we've discussed it earlier, we can do a couple of things in Estonia. For example, hack Estonian online voting. So I think that governments should do more for the real sense of it, but also for the PR side. And I'm a former foreign minister, which means I can say whatever I want. I'm not responsible.
Yeah, sure.
So just a quick follow-on. Hack the Pentagon was because Microsoft had finally moved into the bug bounty space. It was Michael Solmeyer, who was at the Pentagon at the time, is now, of course, at Harvard Belfer Center, of course, where a lot of people go. But he invited me to brief the Pentagon on how we actually constructed it such that we didn't have to bounty everything, such that we were strategic about it. And I actually advised the Pentagon not to start with a bug bounty program. I told them to please start with building a vulnerability coordination program, which will still take you some time. If you think about it, it's a relay race, right? You receive the bug, that's the baton. Try not to drop the baton, especially if you're a company like Apple and manage to drop the baton on that FaceTime bug. They dropped the baton at the beginning of that week. So ways to kind of create those processes was my recommendation because they had a new defense digital service whose job and charter it was to bring the best of private sector technology and processes into the Pentagon faster. They wanted to accelerate, and that's why they chose to do a bug bounty. They did also say they would never call it Hack the Pentagon. Oh, well.
They called it.
So perhaps to add to this, actually, I would never see that we from the German government would put on a bug bounty program. Clearly, we have a different role. That might be a good thing for a company that produces software and tries to get some information by different ways. We have to be a broker in the game. And it's never good if a broker starts paying on one side, then it starts getting paid on the other one. That is something clearly something we don't want and we can't do. So what we need is some process to deal with weaknesses. Clearly we have a process that's just called BSI, the Federal Office for Information Security. So there's clear reporting system. If someone, might be anyone, reports to the BSI, then it's for sure that the BSI goes up to the one who produced the system or the software and reports this again and tries to push forward fixing this weakness. Clearly, besides that, we need, as a government that has also to support the work of the police forces and the intelligence services, we have to have a reliable process in managing weaknesses that are used for some way for the police to go into networks on a legal basis, and that legal basis exists in Germany. And there they need some weaknesses, and so clearly there has to be a process, and that is set up at the moment. I already started some half-open discussion process, Stiftung Neue Verantwortung, you know, and so we are going forward now to establish a process that is also acceptable for the public, that is acceptable for the experts, and in the end, that's acceptable for the German parliament and the government, so that we can all do our job on a reliable basis.
But in terms of speed, I would say handling those new processes from the government point of view, you not struggle with agility?
Clearly, I'm sure when I would ask the ones here from producing companies that come up to us with certification requirements, they would always say there's not enough agility and dynamic into the process the government establishes. We are working on that, and there are some proofs actually in the field that we can do so. For example, in the field of secure elements, I think we do a real good job there, and we have found a way to deal with industry in a production cycle so that they can get their certification right when they put the product in the market. So that's important for the company, but that's also important for the government, because it makes no sense to put out a certification on a product that was given to us 2 years ago and that's already vanished from the market. That makes no sense, so we have to find new processes, and that's also part of the certification framework we are establishing.
How does this certification vulnerability topic still takes part of your norms you're developing? Is that a part of your strategy and having an idea globally? Because that's not obviously only a German problem or a US problem, it's obviously a global problem.
It brings back to the question of clarity, just to understand and to know, everybody understands what allowed, what not. Do we listen to IT people? Do we listen to tech geeks? Luta was speaking about our commission. So our first norm, if you just Google cyberstability.org, our first norm was protection of the public core of internet. I can't imagine we could have done that without very deep expertise coming from that sector, from the IT people sector. On certification, well, I have to say that our commission has not paid much attention. We're not dealing much with that. But I do think that certifications are needed, so that what we heard also today from Julian King. So I absolutely agree here with him.
So Raúl, on the research side, what is Spain thinking about this topic actually, certification and getting vulnerabilities maybe in a standard process addressed?
Well, I think there are a lot of good ideas coming from research. We have to listen probably to come back to foundations. Like I was talking at the beginning, to reset and reset, trying to talk each other, trying to find common goals. But here, for sure, there is another point. There are a lot of interest from the research community to help. They have been approached several times by industry saying, okay, who is the one who knows more about this? Okay, we'll hire him, but they will not give you back anything. So I think this is a win-win. It should be a win-win approach. So once we have win-win approach, we should to shift the paradigm. So I think that because of the norm certification and so on, That's good, sounds very good, but we have to think about the reality, which is dynamics. So there is a lot of dynamics now. We have to think about the end users, because we all share the common goal of having resilience. I think this is something that we are here sit down because we all want this. So what about end users? What about the experts? We should trying to give from a broad picture, an holistic approach in which we have to listen and then to talk, and not like we are doing things. We are trying to talk, saying this is the thing that we have to do, and then we will listen. So I think the research community have a lot of experience here. Even startups that have fight against certifications which are very cost effective, and then the number of versions that any of us is updating each month or devices. So we should think about the dynamics of the updates and so on, and be ready that we will need to patch and try to foster processes to become more agile on these kind of processes. But think about for cost-effective solutions, because the objective is to have more resilience society.
So presuming that we have done the job well on having a global governance in place, having maybe also the rules and norms, everything has been established. Maria, still, you listening to all your customers who have problems with fraud. So what actually are the problems on the customer side from the organizational point of view in order to be fit for the future? Culture-wise, maybe.
I think it's not just fraud, right? It's actually the threat. And I think we can't mistake compliance, frameworks, resiliency, processes for security. Everyone's checking a box on security, and that doesn't make you more secure. So if you look at PCI compliance, if you look at the NIST framework, and who's updating it? We talked a lot today about AI. We talked a lot today about technology, the evolution of the criminal, the evolution of the actor, and all the tools they're using. But no one's looking at, are we updating any of the things that we say are going to make us more secure? I don't think you can use security, the word security, and compliance or, a framework or all in the same sentence. Yeah. I just don't think it means you're secure. I think what do customers expect? I think until customers get their money back, right? When they're defrauded, when something happens, the banks are giving their money back. Until they have to be accountable as well, I think they're not going to pay attention to security. We have to change people's behavior. We do have to educate them, but we've been talking for 15, 20 years about educating people. Hey, use strong passwords, don't click on links, name it, we've all heard about it, but people still aren't doing it. So what's going to change people's behavior? And I think every company has programs in place to educate. If you go to any financial website, there's programs out there to educate their customers and their consumers. The banks are starting to take a different role or a different stance. If you have given away your credentials and you've transferred that money, they may not give that money back to you. I think when that starts happening, people are going to pay more attention. And I think there has to be implications, and there has to be reasons why you change,
The reason I believe I was surprised by the way that so few hands were coming up when we talk about the whether we are over-regulated on cyber or not. I believe actually we have a lot of rules and norms, whether on compliance in place. And the working with corporations, I feel that they already have a compliance tsunami in place. My question would be, how does the board of directors could really measure their risk nowadays? When we heard about that there are connected risks, so that's not a two-dimension risk equation anymore. My question would be to you guys, do we not think about new frameworks on how to evaluate risk, enterprise risk? And what are some steps forward?
Well, I think there's definitely that description is correct. So there's a tsunami of regulations. There's a tsunami of different standards and requirements, and there hasn't been enough harmonization of where are the overlaps. Where can you provide efficiencies? If you do PCI and you do HIPAA, where do you not have to repeat your efforts, and all of that stuff. But all of that still leads us to this place where we haven't figured out what are the essential controls to do well in order to protect against most things. No one has actually agreed upon that. There's just lists of lists. And I think in order to even get through all of those, you would probably die in place, right, in an organization. It's never going to be enough for a particular CSO or CISO to affect huge amounts of change that push the needle that much in any given organization. Similar with governments, they are in conflict. They are in conflict with do more with less, spend very little in terms of your budgets, keep the equipment working as long as possible. Well, that puts them out of updatability to the latest versions in a lot of ways. So we are dealing with conflict that among these different regulations and policies, and a lack of harmonization.
So the key learning for me, actually, we talked about collaboration a lot today. I think for the next couple of years, it's more important to orchestrate and maybe optimize all the efforts we're going to have to run with. We have only 5 minutes left, I see, and the beauty is that you will have the last words in front of Mr. Oettinger. And I thought that you maybe think about one single goal or priority you have on your on your table, get it realized tomorrow, whatever it costs. Just feel it could be done. What would it be, and how it would be? To what level it would be increase our stability in cyber? And Maria, I would love to hear your choice first.
Okay. So I think number one, there's no regulation with the criminals, right? So, and we go to these conferences. How many conferences have you been to that people talked about this? Information sharing, how do we work together for a common goal? Let's break down barriers. I think, let's start here. Let's start here today. What's one thing, leaving this conference today, that we all agree that we're going to go and do, and we're going to do different? Is there one thing with all these, you have some people that have the authority and the power to make a change. What's the one thing that we could say, based on this conference, we're going to do? And I don't have that answer, but I think there's a lot of really smart people in this room, smarter than me, that we could come up with one thing. And we won't execute it on today, but let's go execute. Let's figure it out, and let's go execute. And make it different. Make this conference different. And the next year when we come back, let's see, did we execute on the one thing that we thought we would do together, collectively?
Thank you. Andreas.
When I look at different topics that are viral and at the moment, for example, the 5G topic, then it becomes clear that two topics are closely interrelated. That is digital sovereignty on one side and supply chain security on the other side. So my wish would be that all the real good abstract standards and norms we have developed during the last years, and they are there already, that we put this forward into a real regulation that is oriented at the functionality we want to reach, but gives you immediately the security that anyone needs within the network. So that if that could be done tomorrow, great.
Okay, thank you. Raúl?
I would take the opportunity that the audience has a lot of experience and brought us to a lot of prosperity till today, because we're managing top-level organizations. But we have to teach, to make education, to educate and to teach our children that will be the leaders of tomorrow. So I think that we have to bring back ethics. We have to bring back and try to have and get these common goals. So I borrowed a sentence from Mother Teresa, which is, give the world the best you have and you may get hurt. Give the world your best anyway. So I think this is my...
Thank you, Raúl.
wish.
Very difficult to say something after Mother Teresa, but, but I have two things. If I have to pick one, then I'd like to say that let's move in multi-stakeholder model, inclusiveness, from slogans to deeds. And I'm also looking at industry and private sector people who are here. It means also better cooperation among yourself. Not only the giants, but listening to SMEs. Because when we go to places, to conferences like this one, we see the same big ones, big guys. how much is the voice of SMEs heard? I don't know. So multi-stakeholder model from slogan to deeds. And second, I hope that cybersecurity next year will move to the main stage of the Munich Security Conference.
Okay, another hard act to follow. It is Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And no one has mentioned
Yes.
Valentine's Day in the context of our topic, so I'm going to try. Here we go. I think that I've been a professional in the security industry for 20 years. I started when I was, just guess, okay? But I was not trained in computer science. That was not my major. I was a molecular biologist and a mathematician. I worked on the Human Genome Project. And at that time, I thought world peace will happen once we map the genome, because we're all so similar, right? That apparently did not work out. So here we are in this age where we've been trying a lot of the same things over and over again. And I look at it, not as a security life cycle, but here we go, a security love cycle, where we have actually been caught in the immature phase of being infatuated with security and trendy topics and things like bug bounties. But a bug bounty in that sense, or even vulnerability discovery at all, is just this one aspect of the problem that we have to solve. And so much like in love, you have to progress to a more mature, committed stage, and eventually to cohabitate forever with security. And so I think that what we need to do, if we could change the world tonight, and tomorrow would be a different place, we would nail the basics at scale, which we never managed to do when the internet was smaller. When I first started hacking things, the internet was a lot smaller than it is today. And we did not, I retired from professional hacking a dozen years ago, and yet systems are still vulnerable to me. And that is our problem, because we got caught in the infatuation stage of our love affair with security. So let's mature this love together and not just be committed, but cohabitate with it in all of the boring ways that security hygiene is necessary, right? People say that we need to make security sexy. Well, hacking things is sexy, but eventually somebody's got to fix them and somebody's got to prevent them. And that's basically the dental hygiene, day-to-day love affair with security that we should be having that's committed. Thanks.
Thank you so much.